My name is Desiree Vale, 35 years old. The day I came home from deployment, the garage breathed dust. I lifted the door with the same muscle memory I'd had since childhood, expecting steel blue gleam and the faint, clean scent of old vinyl and aftershave. Instead, the light fell on an empty rectangle and two darker tracks of tire shadow that looked like something had been lifted out of my chest and wheeled away. For a few seconds, I just stood there with my hand still on the strap, feeling the air thin, the way it does on a ship's deck when a storm slips in without warning. "Oh, that old thing," my father said behind me, casual as weather. He cradled a mug of coffee like it was proof of being right about everything. "I sold it." "What?" The word came out flat, too small for the earthquake I felt. My boots were still salt stiff, my uniform pressed to regulation. I might as well have been invisible. "Your brother needed 150 for the wedding," he said, as if we were bartering heads of lettuce. "He's marrying into an investment family. It's a good move for us." For us. The phrase rattled around the hollow space where the car had been. "You sold Grandpa's Navy car." "It was just sitting here," he said. "You're never home. Time to let go of the past." He sipped. The mug clicked softly against his teeth. Mom appeared at the doorway, her hand twisting a dish towel. "Honey, don't start." "Don't start?" My voice wanted to rise. I forced it down. Grandpa's line, "Honor doesn't shout, it endures," flashed like a hand on my shoulder. My brother stepped around them, tuxedo measurements folded under his arm, wearing the smug grin of someone who has never had to wonder if he'd earned anything. "Relax, sis, it's just a car." I left before the words I couldn't take back broke free. In the base parking lot that night, I sat with the brass key on my palm. JWH. The edges were worn smooth from decades of use, from Sundays when he'd slide the key in, wink, and say, "Hop in, sailor." Under the street lamp, the letters caught the light, and for the first time since his funeral, I whispered to the quiet, "You told me it would protect me, Chief." "From what?" 3 days later, the phone rang. "Ma'am?" A man's voice, careful, respectful. "Officer Daniels from Harborview Auto. We found something inside your grandfather's car. You need to come down." My heartbeat stumbled. "Inside the car?" "Yes, ma'am. The glove box had a note with your name and a base extension. There's also, well, it'll be easier to show you." Harborview Auto sat squat behind a faded blue awning, the kind of place that doesn't reinvent itself every 5 years to look like somewhere else. A string of plastic pennants drooped and flapped in the salt wind. Across the street, the VFW sign had Friday Fish Fry slotted in crooked black letters. Daniels waited by the door in a brown jacket that had seen seasons. He straightened when he saw the uniform, offered his hand like a man raised by someone who taught him how. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I'm a Navy brat. My dad did 20 on the Nimitz. When I saw the bumper tag shadow, I thought, this one matters." "Thank you for calling," I said. Formalities kept my hands from shaking. "You said you found something." "In the back." He glanced around the lot, lowering his voice. "Also, when your father brought it in, he didn't come alone. Younger guy did most of the talking, quick to sign, quicker to leave. My brother. Bitter isn't a flavor so much as a temperature. It drops the room a few degrees." We passed a row of sedans, an old Trans Am with a handwritten "For Sale" tucked beneath a wiper. The service bay smelled like hot rubber and oil. Somewhere a radio played Patsy Cline low, like memory humming to itself. Daniels led me through a door marked storage and flicked on a switch. There it was. Steel blue paint, dusty but still handsome. Chrome trim, running clean along the body. Even under fluorescent wash, I could see the faint outline where the Navy bumper tag had protected the paint, a ghost of pride preserved by adhesive. My throat tightened. "How did you know to call me?" I asked. He held up a small plastic bag. Inside, Grandpa's dog tags flashed next to a folded scrap of paper. "Glove box," he said. The note had your name and a base number. The tags read J.W. Hayes. We paused delivery when the VIN check flagged something. Estate transfer pending. I'm not a lawyer, but it looked unresolved. "Foreshadow isn't always music. Sometimes it's a rubber stamp." I nodded. "May I?" He opened the driver's door like a parishioner opening a church, careful, reverent. The interior smelled like old vinyl, and the clean bite of a classic aftershave kept on a workbench. "Before you arrived, I didn't touch anything beyond the glove box," Daniel said. "But when we lifted the trunk mat for water damage, we found a secondary panel. Professional work. Law enforcement would call it clean. If we're going to look, I figured you should be here. The trunk key turned with a click that sounded like my childhood. Light flickered, then steadied. He lifted the mat, revealing hardboard. 2 small screws were sunk flush and waxed over so neatly you'd never notice unless you'd been taught to look for what the world hides on purpose. Grandpa's brass key had a second, thinner tooth I'd always assumed was decorative. I lined it up with a tiny slot beside one of the screws. It fit with the rightness of a thing made for a single use. I turned. Then the other. The panel lifted like an album cover turning to a page you'd somehow never seen. Wrapped in oilcloth lay a narrow, rectangular box. Heavy wood, dovetail joints, the kind he'd craft on quiet afternoons on the bench behind the mower, burned into the lid. JWH. And beneath it, a word he lived as if it were a job description. Honor. Would you like privacy? Daniels asked, already taking a respectful step back. Stay, I said. You may be a witness before this is over. The clasp resisted, then gave. Inside, velvet rubbed thin, where fingers had lifted keepsakes in and out over years. On top lay a letter on thick stock with an anchor watermark. My name in his blocky print, the same print he used to label coffee cans in the garage. Screws, washers, fuses. Beneath that, metals I knew and one I didn't. A citation with names blacked out, dates and ports typed in the exacting way the Navy preserves time. There were envelopes, too. Handwritten thanks from families. For fixing our roof when he was on crutches. For getting him that job. For paying the electric bill. Acts of service done under the radar and never paraded at holidays. I put my hand over my mouth. He never told me. That kind rarely does, Daniels murmured. They just get it done. On the outside of the letter, in steady, unfancy print, open only if the car is taken or if you forget what I taught you. I thought of my father's mug and his shrug, the way he'd said, "It's just a car," like the past was a coat we were silly to keep wearing. I thought of my brother's measurements folded just so, and his grin like a receipt for something he hadn't paid for. I slid my thumb under the fold. The paper creaked. Before I could read, Daniels cleared his throat. There's more. The title's messy. Your father signed a bill of sale, but with the estate transfer notation. Unless you consented, which you didn't, this might be an unauthorized transfer. We held delivery. Start a hold file, I said, the words coming steady. Make copies of whatever you need from me. He nodded. I'll get our notary. He stepped away, leaving me with the car, the box, and the letter that suddenly weighed more than metal. I unfolded the page. His voice rose in the room like the smell of engine oil on a summer Sunday. Kiddo, if you're reading this, someone forgot what matters. Don't get angry. Anger burns fast and blinds good people. Honor doesn't shout, it endures. The sentence slipped under my ribs and braced me from the inside. When I was 14, I'd punched a boy who laughed at his Navy tattoo. He'd made me scrub the car until the chrome held the sky. You don't prove someone wrong by yelling, he'd said. You prove them wrong by who you become. My eyes fell to the next line. If this car ever leaves your hands without your say-so, check under the driver's seat. What you find there will show you why I trusted you with it. The room narrowed to a point. I knelt by the open door. The rails were stiff with age. My fingertips found a cool edge, then a thin metal lever I'd never noticed. I pulled. The seat slid forward with a reluctant groan. In the narrow gap, taped to the floorboard, sat a small tin box the size of a lunch pail. Not much to look at. But my pulse hammered like I was cutting the red wire and praying. I peeled the tape's slow, reverent, anechoic world gathering around my hands. Inside, nested neat as ship's stores, lay 3 things. A flash drive sealed in plastic, a folded envelope stamped Department of the Navy, restricted, and a photograph of Grandpa in dress whites with his hand on the shoulder of a much younger man, my father. Both of them smiling like the future was a sunrise they could name. Footsteps approached from the office. Paper rustled. "Ma'am?" Daniel said from the doorway, and the way his voice softened told me he had seen enough to know we were past sales and into something sacred. I didn't turn. I set the tin box on a folded blanket in the trunk beside the wooden one branded Honor, and let my fingers rest on the envelope's seal without breaking it. A latch somewhere in me clicked. The same sound the trunk key had made. The same sound from long ago Sundays when a hand steadied the wheel and a voice said, "Drive it straight." When I brought the tin box to the base the next morning, the February light was sharp and clean, the kind Grandpa would have called good driving weather. The wind off the harbor carried a briny chill that bit through the uniform cloth and kept my mind steady. Inside the legal liaison's office, fluorescent lights hummed quietly above the neat stacks of folders. Lieutenant Grace Miller looked up as I entered. Sharp eyes, calm face, the kind of person who saw storms coming long before they hit. "I appreciate you making time," I said, setting the tin box on her desk. "I think this belongs to the Navy as much as it belongs to me." Grace glanced at the stamp on the envelope. "Department of the Navy, restricted," she read softly. "Where did you find this?" "In a hidden compartment under the driver's seat of my grandfather's car," my voice caught briefly. "The one my father sold." That made her look up fully. "Sold?" I told her everything. The empty garage, the dealership call, the note that said, if sold, call her. Daniels's discovery, the medals, the letter that had already begun to rewrite everything I thought I knew about my family. She listened without interrupting, hands folded, expression carved from patience and empathy. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "Commander Vale," she said, using my rank with gentle respect, "if these files are legitimate Navy property, they need to be verified immediately." She slid the flash drive into a secure port. Lines of text scrolled across the screen, scanned letters, financial ledgers, official memos. Paid rent for Sergeant M, 1977. Arranged employment for L. Rodriguez, 1982. Sent funds to widow, confirm receipt. I leaned closer, heart tightening. Every entry pulsed with purpose. He was still serving, I whispered, even after retirement. Grace nodded. Unofficial relief channel. Looks like he was part of a post-service assistance network. It wasn't sanctioned, exactly, but it wasn't illegal either. Quiet support for veterans who'd fallen through the cracks. She looked at me, her gaze steady. "Your grandfather wasn't just driving a car, he was running a mission." The words rang in the air like a flag catching wind. I reached into the box and unfolded the photograph of Grandpa and my father. Two men smiling, side by side, frozen before the years that would turn warmth into rivalry. "He helped so many," I murmured. "And my father sold his legacy for a wedding." Grace said quietly, "People forget that honor isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just stubborn." I smiled faintly, throat tight. "That sounds like him." We both looked at the envelope again. Grace hesitated, then said, "We'll log this as pending verification, but the next step is to identify any living contacts. If your grandfather helped these families, there may be surviving relatives." I nodded. "He left a note about a final route." I opened the folder on the flash drive marked Final Route. One address, one instruction in his familiar hand. Deliver the enclosed medal to Lieutenant R. Thompson, retired. If unable, trust to my granddaughter. She'll know what to do. Clearwater Shores, less than 20 miles away. The drive out there was like stepping back through time. Pine trees leaned in on both sides of the old county road. Sunlight flickered between branches, gold and shy. My reflection in the windshield was all angles, discipline, fatigue, determination. But inside, something softer had begun to stir. The house was small, white, with a blue tin roof that gleamed under the midday sun. An American flag hung neatly from the porch, rippling with every sea breeze. A wheelchair ramp led to the front door. When I knocked, a man's voice called, "Coming!" He opened the door with effort, bracing on a cane. His hair was silver white, his eyes sharp despite the years. He looked at the uniform first. Habit more than curiosity. "Can I help you, Commander?" "Sir," I said, standing straighter. "Are you Lieutenant Robert Thompson?" "Haven't heard that title in a long while." He smiled faintly. "Who's asking?" "My name's Desiree Vale. My grandfather was Chief John Hayes." For a moment, the man froze. Then recognition washed over him like tide returning to shore. "Johnny Hayes?" His voice cracked on the name. "I'll be damned. Come in, Commander. It's been too long since anyone brought that man's name through this door." The living room smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. Photos lined every wall. Ships, crews, medals, grandchildren. Thompson motioned to a worn recliner across from his own. I sat, placing the small box between us. "He wanted you to have this," I said, sliding it toward him. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside lay a Navy cross, polished but aged. The old man drew a sharp breath. "He found it," he whispered, "after I was injured. It went missing during evacuation. I told him to forget it, that I'd earned it already. He said he'd track it down. He looked up at me, eyes bright with tears. That man never stopped serving. We all thought he'd retired. He just shifted from missions to miracles. I felt my throat tighten. He never told me any of this. To me, he was just Grandpa, the man who made me scrub chrome until I could see my reflection in it. Thompson laughed softly. That sounds exactly like him. We traded stories. Him about the war, me about the car. The conversation moved slowly, like waves against the dock, each memory carrying another truth to the surface. After a long silence, he said, "You've got the same fire in you, Commander. Don't let anyone, not even your own blood, put it out." I swallowed hard. I don't plan to. Before I left, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "Your grandfather said once that honor isn't about medals or orders. It's about keeping your word when no one else remembers why it mattered in the first place. You're doing that." Outside, I stood for a while under the soft creak of the flagpole, the wind tugging at my hair. Somewhere out on the bay, a ship horn blew, low and steady. I looked down at the box in my hands, lighter now, and felt the weight shift from grief to purpose. Driving back toward town, I replayed Grandpa's words from his letter. Anger burns fast and blinds good people. He'd been right. I didn't need to burn anyone. I just needed to bring truth to light. By evening, the bay was wrapped in amber. I parked by the harbor where the water turned gold under the sinking sun. The car's window reflected my face, tired, calm, but resolute. I pulled out the envelope stamped Department of the Navy, restricted, not to open it yet, just to hold it. The seal caught the last stripe of sunlight, flaring briefly before dimming again. Tomorrow, I would verify the letter's contents with legal counsel. Tomorrow, I would decide what to do with the car, the files, the story. But tonight, I sat there with the hum of the engine cooling beside me and whispered into the fading light, "You were right, Chief. Honor doesn't shout. It waits." And as the horizon swallowed the last rim of the sun, I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace yet, but direction. The road ahead was clear. 3 days later, I stood at the edge of a manicured lawn overlooking the bay, the hum of conversation weaving through the air like a hive just before disturbance. My brother's wedding, the one that had cost Grandpa's car, was in full, glittering motion. Crystal glasses clinked. The string quartet played something delicate enough to disguise vanity as elegance, and my father moved through the crowd like a man hosting his own coronation. I hadn't planned to come, but after what I'd discovered, after reading Grandpa's letter, after Lieutenant Miller's confirmation, after returning the medal to Thompson, I knew I had to. Not for revenge, for truth. The afternoon sun glinted off the chandeliers strung across the white tent. My father stood near the aisle, champagne flute in hand, his smile polished for the cameras of a life he'd built out of appearances. My brother hovered beside him, tuxedo sharp, charm effortless, laughter hollow. They hadn't seen me yet. The crowd did first. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. A uniform does that, not because of shine, but because of what it implies. Discipline, truth, accountability. I walked forward, the sound of my heels puncturing the hush, the envelope with the Navy seal steady in my hand. My father turned, smile freezing halfway. "Desiree," he said, the name clipped. "You shouldn't—" "We need to talk," I interrupted softly, though the softness carried weight. "Not now," he said, eyes darting toward the guests. "This isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," I replied. "You wanted to show the world what the Vale name stands for. Let's do that." A few people shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to stay or slip away. I kept walking until I stood directly in front of him, the sea behind me flashing silver like judgment. "This," I said, holding up the letter, "is from the Department of the Navy. It concerns the car you sold for this wedding." My brother scoffed. "You're kidding. You're going to make a scene over some old medal?" "Not medal," I said evenly. "Mission." The word landed like the dropped anchor. My father's color faded. "Desiree, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I unfolded the letter, the gold insignia catching the light. The Navy confirmed the Hayes Relief Car Project, an operation run quietly by veterans to help families in need. Grandpa's car wasn't a collectible. It was classified equipment. You sold government property. A murmur rippled through the guests. Shock, curiosity, discomfort. My brother laughed nervously. "Oh, come on, she's exaggerating." A retired colonel from the bride's family stepped closer, his voice steady. "Is that true?" My father's jaw clenched, his mouth opening, closing, searching for an escape hatch in the silence. I took a breath. He spent 35 years serving this country. When he retired, he didn't stop. That car carried aid, letters, relief checks, everything he could give, and you sold it for a wedding fund. The colonel's face Desireed. My brother's fiancé paled. My father whispered, "I didn't know." "You never asked," I said, "because honor doesn't fit into a balance sheet." Behind us, the string quartet faltered to a stop. The only sound left was the restless wind against the tent fabric. I reached into my jacket and placed a small wooden box, the one engraved honor, on the white draped table beside the untouched cake. Gasps fluttered through the crowd. "This was hidden inside that car," I said. Letters, medals, and proof of every man and woman he helped. He called it his rolling oath. "You didn't just sell a car, Dad, you sold his promise." The colonel took a step forward and murmured to no one in particular, "I served under Chief Hayes. That man was a legend." That single sentence changed everything. Several veterans in the crowd, men I hadn't noticed before, straightened instinctively, hands at their sides, some saluting in silent respect. My father's champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered. His voice cracked. "I didn't mean—" I met his eyes. Intent doesn't rewrite history. For a long, fragile second, no one moved. The air was heavy enough to crush a lie. Then, slowly, I turned toward the crowd, lifting the letter so they could see the official crest. "This," I said, "is what the Vale name was built on. Not wealth, not status, but service. And that's what we'll carry forward." I tucked the letter back into its envelope and turned to leave. The silence followed me all the way out of the tent, the sound of my boots echoing like punctuation marks behind me. Outside, the sun hung low over the bay, painting the water in streaks of bronze. Parked near the edge of the venue was the Navy staff car, restored, dignified, timeless. Daniels leaned against the fender, hands in his pockets. "Guess I missed the fireworks," he said quietly. "You missed the noise," I replied, "not the meaning." He smiled faintly. "You did good, Commander." "I don't know about good," I said, brushing a hand over the hood, "but I did what he would have done." He reached into his jacket and pulled something small, Grandpa's dog tag, still warm from his hand. "You left this at the office." I took it, the metal cool against my palm. "Thank you." "Looks right on you," he said, watching as I slipped it over my neck. Behind me, footsteps crunched on gravel. My father. He stopped a few paces away. Daniels gave me a knowing look, then drifted off toward his truck, leaving us alone. My father's voice came out rough. "I read the letter," he said. "Grace Miller called. She told me everything." I didn't turn. "Then you know what you sold." He hesitated. I was wrong. The words fell between us like stones in water. Small sound, deep impact. "I don't know how to fix it," he added quietly. I finally faced him. The sunset caught the side of his face, aging him more honestly than the years had. "Start by remembering what it stood for," I said. "Start there." His throat worked as he swallowed. "He was proud of you, you know." "He was proud of you too," I said. "Once." He nodded, eyes glistening. The silence that followed wasn't peace yet, but it was possible. I walked to the car and opened the driver's door. The hinges creaked, a familiar, forgiving sound. "Want a ride, mate?" I asked. He blinked, surprised, then nodded slowly. "Yeah," he whispered. "I think I do." We drove along the coast road as the sky turned violet, the ocean flashing beside us in long, rhythmic glints. The only sound was the steady hum of the engine, the same heartbeat that had carried generations of service and stubborn grace. After a long time, he said, "I don't deserve forgiveness." "Maybe not," I said quietly, "but Grandpa would say you should try earning it." A small, broken laugh escaped him. "He would, wouldn't he?" We didn't speak again until the stars appeared. The road stretched ahead, unending, the car steady between the lines like an oath fulfilled. And somewhere, faint as a whisper over the sound of the engine, I heard him. Grandpa's voice, calm and proud. "Keep your course steady, kiddo." The next morning, sunlight spilled through my kitchen window like a quiet truce. Steam rose from a forgotten mug of coffee, curling lazily toward the ceiling. I stood there staring at the brass key resting on the table beside the folded flag from Grandpa's funeral. For years, those two objects had symbolized grief and loss. But now, after everything, they looked like something else entirely. Continuity. My phone buzzed. A message from Lieutenant Grace Miller. "Commander Vale, Paperwork confirmed. The sale was unauthorized. The vehicle's title reverts fully to you under military custodianship. Congratulations, and thank you for protecting Navy heritage. I read it twice before setting the phone down. A deep breath left me, slow and trembling. It was done. The car was legally mine again, though it didn't feel like ownership anymore. It felt like stewardship, like inheritance, but not of money, of meaning. Outside, the staff car sat in the driveway, its chrome edges winking under the mid-morning sun. For a heartbeat, I could almost see Grandpa leaning against the fender, arms folded, that half smile hiding amusement and pride in equal measure. "Keep her clean, sailor," he'd say. "The car deserves better than dust." Later that morning, I met Daniels and Lieutenant Miller at the Veterans Heritage Division downtown. The building was older than both of us, but carried itself with the quiet dignity of places built to last. The marble floors shone. The walls were lined with framed photos of men and women who had served long after the world stopped watching. We parked the Navy car right out front. Heads turned as soon as the sunlight caught the blue steel. A few passers-by stopped to take photos, whispering, "That's gorgeous," like reverence could be casual. Inside, Director Caldwell, a tall man with white hair, still cropped military short, greeted us with a handshake that spoke of discipline more than strength. When he saw the documents, his eyes softened. "John Hayes," he murmured. "I remember that name. My father used to talk about him, said he once helped a sailor's widow after Hurricane Hugo, paid her rent himself when the benefits got delayed." "That sounds like him," I said, smiling faintly. Caldwell studied the papers again. Grandpa's handwritten logs, the letter with the Navy seal, the authorization stamped from 1989. "Commander," he said finally, "I'd like to propose something. The car, the medals, the letters, they deserve to stay together. We'd like to feature them in our permanent exhibit, Quiet Heroes of the Fleet." The words caught in my chest. "It should be under his name," I said quickly. "This was his mission." "Of course," Caldwell replied. "The plaque will read, 'In memory of Command Master Chief John W. Hayes, honor carried forward by those who remember.'" For a moment, I couldn't speak. That phrase, "honor carried forward," felt like an answer to a question I'd been asking since the day the garage went empty. I nodded. He'd like that. The paperwork took most of the day. Daniel signed as a witness, proud but understated. When it was done, we stood outside again under the tall flagpole. The staff car gleamed like it had been waiting for this moment all along. "You did right by him," Daniel said quietly. "Not many people fight for something they can't sell." I smiled. "That's what makes it worth it." Across the street, movement caught my eye. My father was standing by the edge of the parking lot, hands deep in his pockets. No bravado, no champagne glass. Just a man stripped of excuses, trying to figure out how to stand in the presence of what he'd broken. I walked toward him. He didn't move until I stopped a few feet away. "I saw the news release," he said, voice low. "They're making it official." "They are," I said. "The car goes in next week." He nodded, eyes on the ground. "Your brother's furious. Says the wedding crowd's still talking." "Let them," I said. "Sometimes shame is the only mirror that works." He gave a small, sad laugh. "You sound just like him." "I try to." He looked up, eyes raw. "I read through the folder last night. The letters he kept. The people he helped. I didn't know any of it. I thought he was just tinkering to stay busy." "You never asked," I said softly. He nodded once. "You're right. I was too focused on being seen to notice who I'd become." The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was heavy with what neither of us could repair, but both of us finally understood. He cleared his throat. "What happens to me now? You going to press charges?" I shook my head. "No. You'll have to live knowing your daughter had to teach you what honor means. That's punishment enough." His eyes glistened. Can I come to the ceremony?" I studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, but don't come as a guest. Come as his son." The following week, the Veterans Heritage Division hosted the ceremony. Rows of veterans in crisp uniforms filled the hall. A Navy band played softly as the covered car was rolled into its glass display. Above it hung a banner, "The Navy Car Project, Honor That Never Retired." When Director Caldwell finished his introduction, he motioned for me to speak. I stepped to the podium, the folded flag resting beside the microphone. My father stood off to the side, shoulders squared but eyes down. "My grandfather," I began, voice steady, "served 35 years in the Navy. But his greatest service came after he hung up his uniform. He believed duty doesn't end when orders do, that every day lived with integrity is another mission accomplished. I looked at the car gleaming under the museum lights. He taught me that honor isn't loud. It doesn't make speeches or demand applause. It shows up again and again when nobody else will. A few veterans nodded. One wiped his eyes. I glanced toward my father. Sometimes we forget that lesson. But the beautiful thing about honor, I said, is that it waits. It gives us the chance to find our way back. Applause rose softly at first, then built until the sound filled the room like a tide. When it faded, I placed the folded flag on the hood and whispered, "Welcome home, Chief." My father stepped forward, laying a trembling hand on the car's fender. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "It always was," I replied. He nodded, voice breaking. So was he. We stood there together, 2 generations finally understanding the weight of a name that had almost been lost. Outside, the flag above the museum caught the wind and billowed, bright and alive. I touched the dog tag resting against my collarbone. "Honor doesn't shout," Grandpa had written. "It endures." And that day, under that flag, I finally understood what he meant. 2 weeks after the ceremony, the mornings felt different. The light seemed cleaner, like someone had finally wiped the horizon free of residue. I still woke early out of habit. Service life never really leaves you. But now there was no alarm, no orders, no briefing, just stillness. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant call of gulls outside. I poured coffee, black, strong, the way Grandpa used to drink it when he said it tasted like getting things done. Then I picked up the small wooden box from the kitchen table, the one that held the last of his belongings from the glove compartment. Inside were 3 things: his watch, his old Navy lighter, and a folded note in that same square, deliberate handwriting. "If you're reading this, kiddo, the mission's complete. Don't mourn me by standing still. Keep driving." I laughed under my breath, eyes blurring. That was him. No goodbye, no sentiment, just a nudge forward disguised as an order. I pressed the lighter to my lips and whispered, "Aye, sir." Later that morning, I walked down to the pier. The boards were cool beneath my boots, damp from dawn mist. The air smelled of salt and diesel, familiar, grounding. Seagulls circled lazily above the bay, their cries fading into the hum of distant engines. My father was already there. He stood by the railing, scattering breadcrumbs for the gulls, the way Grandpa used to when I was small. The years sat heavy on him now, not in the body, but in the eyes. He turned when he heard me, managing a quiet smile. "You still come here this early?" he asked. "Always did," I said, stopping beside him. "Grandpa and I used to sit on that bench and watch the carriers leave. He'd tell me every ship had a story." Dad nodded slowly. He used to bring me too, before I thought money was the only story that mattered. For the first time in years, I really looked at him, not as the man who'd betrayed me, but as someone who'd finally stopped pretending not to regret it. "You can't change what you did," I said gently, "but you can decide what kind of son you'll be from now on." He exhaled, eyes on the water. "I thought I knew what success was. Thought legacy meant wealth. Turns out the only legacy worth anything is being remembered for doing right." "That's the one he left us," I said. We stood side by side for a while, watching the sun climb, listening to the low drone of a fishing boat heading out. Neither of us spoke again until the light turned gold and the gulls had gone quiet. "He'd be proud of you," Dad said finally. I smiled faintly. "He'd be proud of you too, for showing up." Dad chuckled softly. "Guess I've still got a few missions left." "We all do," I said. That afternoon, I drove to the Veterans Heritage Division one last time before heading back to base. The exhibit had been completed overnight. The car sat beneath glass now, surrounded by photographs, medals, and the letter that had started everything. A new plaque stood beside it. The Navy Car Project. The Legacy of Command. Master Chief John W. Hayes, for those who served quietly, who gave without asking, and who reminded us that honor never retires. Beneath that inscription, in smaller letters, "Honor doesn't shout, it endures." I ran my hand along the glass, smiling. A few visitors stood nearby, reading the description. An older couple pointed at the car and said they remembered seeing one just like it back in the 70s. A young sailor stood at attention, cap in hand, eyes glistening. He saluted before walking away. The moment held something sacred, not grief, not pride exactly, but continuity, the kind Grandpa had lived for. Before leaving, I drove down to the coastal road he used to love. The ocean shimmered on my right. The pines leaned close on my left, their shadows crossing over the hood in long stripes. It was peaceful, steady, the kind of drive where the silence feels alive. The small brass key lay on the dashboard, catching the light. I touched it gently and whispered, "Mission complete, Chief." I turned on the radio. The first song that came through was an old country tune Grandpa used to hum while polishing the car. I laughed, a short, bright sound that felt like breathing again. That night, I sat at my desk with a blank sheet of paper and began to write. Not a report, not an official statement, just a letter for whoever came after. Dear future sailor, if you ever wonder what honor looks like, it isn't medals or speeches or perfect records. It's the choice you make when no one's watching. It's forgiving people who failed you without letting them break your spirit. It's keeping promises long after the person who made you promise is gone. When the world tells you to get over it, remember this. Some things aren't meant to be forgotten. They're meant to be carried forward. Commander Desiree Vale. I sealed the letter and tucked it into the small wooden box alongside the lighter and the watch. Maybe someday, years from now, another hand would find it and understand. The next morning, I returned to the pier. The sun was already high, gilding the water in sheets of white fire. My father was there again, leaning on the railing, feeding the gulls. Without speaking, he handed me a photograph. Grandpa, younger, standing beside the car, arm around a little girl in pigtails. Me. I found it in one of his albums, Dad said softly. Thought you should have it. I looked down at the photo, then back at him. Thank you, I said. He nodded. Guess it's time I learned to drive straight again. I laughed quietly. You'll get there. We stood together for a long time, the gulls wheeling, the wind tugging gently at our sleeves. The horizon stretched wide and calm, and for the first time in years, I felt something like peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally understood that honor doesn't die when the engine stops. It lives on in those who keep driving. So I lifted my chin, looked out toward the open water, and whispered into the wind, I'll keep driving, Chief. And somewhere, faint but certain, I could almost hear his voice again. Steady, sure, enduring. Drive it straight, kiddo. It's been months since the ceremony, but I still visit the museum every week. The Veterans Heritage Division has become something like a chapel. Quiet, reverent, honest. Each time I walk through the front doors, the air smells faintly of brass polish and history, that unique mixture of metal and memory that clings to stories preserved too long in glass. Grandpa's car sits under the same soft lights, the same blue steel glow. Visitors stop to read the plaque, sometimes whispering to one another like they've stumbled into a secret. Children press their hands against the glass, tracing the curve of the fender. Veterans stand silently, some saluting, others just nodding as if to say, I know this kind of man. Every time I see it, I feel the same steady warmth rise inside me, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't rush, it just holds you. Dad comes with me sometimes now. He doesn't talk much when he does. He just stands there beside me, looking at the car the way a man looks at something he's finally learned to respect. His hands never reach for his pockets anymore. Small detail, but I notice it. That nervous habit of defensiveness is gone. He just stands open, honest. One afternoon, after a group of Navy cadets finished their tour, the director approached us. Commander Vale, he said, we've been getting letters. People writing in after seeing your grandfather's exhibit, families of veterans he helped decades ago. They're sending photographs, thank you notes, some even donations for a scholarship fund we've started in his name. I blinked. A scholarship fund? Caldwell nodded. The John W. Hayes Legacy Fund. We're calling it Honor in Action. First grants go to veterans' children entering naval service next year. Dad exhaled quietly beside me, eyes glistening. He'd like that, he said, doing good even when nobody's watching. Exactly, I replied. That night, I drove home with the windows down, the cool wind threading through my hair. The city lights shimmered on the bay like pieces of a flag laid across the water. On the passenger seat sat Grandpa's brass key, the same one that had started this whole journey. I reached over and turned it in my fingers, feeling the grooves worn smooth by time. Every turn of that key felt like a story restarting. Weeks later, I got a letter from Lieutenant Grace Miller. She was being transferred to a new post and wanted to thank me before she left. At the bottom, she'd written a single line. Your grandfather taught more than honor. He taught endurance. Don't stop now. It made me laugh. that gentle way people in uniform have of giving orders wrapped as encouragement. So I didn't stop. I began volunteering part-time at the museum, guiding school groups, explaining the Navy's history of service beyond combat. The first time I stood in front of the car as a docent, a young boy raised his hand and asked, "Ma'am, did the man who owned this win a lot of medals?" I smiled. "He earned them," I said. But what made him great wasn't the medals. It was that he kept serving when nobody was watching. The boy nodded solemnly, as if understanding more than he should have at that age. After the group left, I lingered near the car. The reflection of the lights shimmered across its polished hood like waves, and for a moment I swore I could hear his voice again. Not ghostly, not haunting, just steady. "Keep the road straight, kiddo." Dad's changed too. It's subtle but real. He sold the beach house he once bragged about and donated half the money to the Legacy Fund. He even started mentoring new Navy recruits at the local Veterans Center. One evening, over dinner, he said, "I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can add something good to the ledger before my time's up." I smiled. He'd call that the right kind of math. We laughed, and for the first time, the sound felt easy, not brittle like it used to. Sometimes, after we talk, I find myself driving down the coast road again. Always the same route, the one Grandpa loved. The wind leans through the open window, carrying the scent of salt and pine, the hum of the engine low and patient. I've learned that healing doesn't arrive with fanfare. It comes in increments, in quiet miles and steady breath. Last week, the museum hosted a small evening event to honor the expansion of the exhibit. The staff asked me to give closing remarks. The hall was dim, the car shining beneath spotlights. As I stepped to the podium, I saw Dad in the front row. He looked older, but lighter somehow, as if the weight of pretending had finally fallen away. I took a deep breath. "When I was 10, I began, my grandfather used to let me ride in this car every Sunday. He called it his rolling promise. I didn't understand it then. I just liked how the chrome shone when he polished it." A ripple of soft laughter filled the room. "But later," I continued, "I realized he wasn't polishing metal. He was tending to something bigger, to the belief that integrity doesn't retire, that what we build with honor will outlast us if we care for it enough." I paused, glancing at the reflection of the car behind me. We live in a world that sells everything: time, loyalty, even history. But some things aren't for sale. They're meant to be carried forward. When the applause came, I let it roll over me, like wind over open water. After the crowd dispersed, I walked alone through the museum one last time that night. The lights dimmed to amber. The silence was complete. I stopped beside the glass case, pressed my palm against it gently, and whispered, "Mission complete, Chief." The reflection staring back wasn't just mine. In the layered glass and faint glare of lights, I saw him too. Faint outline, cap tilted, that quiet smile. And then I heard it again. Soft, steady, almost like the hum of an engine under calm seas. "Keep driving, kiddo." I nodded, the corner of my mouth lifting. "Aye, sir." Outside, the flag on the museum's pole stirred in the evening breeze. The stars hung sharp and sure above the harbor. I walked to my car, started the engine, and eased onto the road. The dashboard glowed faintly, and Grandpa's brass key hung from the mirror, catching light with every turn. The road stretched out ahead, endless, clean, and waiting. And as the first note of an old country tune filled the quiet, I smiled and whispered into the dark, "Honor doesn't end when the story does. It just finds another driver."